start this thing. Well, Fran, here we are. It's been a few months since our first conversation. Um, the world has moved along since then. Lots of new questions and issues are coming up in organizations and in society. But we wanted to come back today to kind of revisit and deepen one of the questions we touched on in our first interview. And that's the question of how has Gestalt shaped your practice?
Mhm.
Right? And you reminded me that it's about 30, 35 years since you were first introduced to Gestalt as an approach. You did your learning in it, learning to become a Gestalt practitioner.
Yeah.
And now, the last 25 plus years, you've been leading your own business, right? Bringing Gestalt to the world, to organizations, to leaders. But maybe it's a little bit interesting to start with from your first exposure to Gestalt, right? Not simply learning about Gestalt, but learning to become a Gestalt practitioner.
Mhm.
What kind of comes up for you as you think of that question?
Uh, First thing that comes up to me is the idea of integrated systems. Well, first of all, let me say thank you again, Michael, for taking the time. And I had those reflections about it. I wanted to be really clear about how it really informs my worldview in a couple of ways. So one is that we have these nested levels of system, and that I can't sort of affect change out there without having affect continually asking myself, what does this mean about me? And of course, as we talked about before, emotional intelligence is a kind of a fully interjected framework for me, as is levels of system. And over the years of doing organization development work, I've kind of really seen those two and the cycle of experience, to name a couple of frameworks, as like my constant companions that sort of orient how I'm how I'm experiencing myself, and thinking about how do we design something, how do we decide to work with the phenomena that shows up in the room, right? So very relational, as you would imagine, and kind of so that leads to kind of self and environment interaction and interpersonal interactions. And what about the team? What's happening at the team level? And then, how does this team interact with other teams? So systemic view. I'm super always starting from the field theory, like what's the context and what's the task that this group is meant to be doing,
Hmm.
and leadership styles and all the rest that comes with it. So I would say levels of system for sure. And just as a like to illustrate like a story, and I think we kind of adjacently and first met each other through this story, that we were fortunate to do that work for the UNDP, right, where we brought together communities of like 100 of multiple perspectives. And I'm not sure I would have been so insistent about having all the worldviews we could get in the community had I not been coming with a Gestalt perspective.
Mm, mm,
That the kind of idea that the problem, or the challenge can't really be understood unless we look at it from many different vantage points that are embodied,
mhm,
right? So if we were doing work on HIV and AIDS, so we insisted that there be sex workers and that there be senators and that there be, the Ministry of Defense and Health and all the rest, like everything we could get, civil society and government. That if, with a fundamental belief on our part, the designer's part, that out of that mix, you're going to get better, more accurate diagnoses of like what's the underlying issues, and then more creative um, solutions.
mm. That makes me think of sort of this phrase, if you want to change a system, you need to get the system into the room. And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, So I'm a bit curious then. I mean, do you see any distinctions, any advantages from this Gestalt approach with levels of system and mobilizing the entire system? Benefits of doing it this way rather than just other forms of multi-stakeholder large systems change.
I, yes, I mean, but they might say they have all the idea, although they might say they have the voices in the room too. So
Sure.
it takes me to another point, which is kind of what do we do when we're in the room?
Mm.
And, as people, process people who really, I just said to somebody today, like, I really believe in the power of process. And I definitely think I got that from Gestalt as well as my graduate school, but my graduate school was just it was a field theory program also. So they had, some commonalities. So the way that we would work with these communities of 100 people or a leadership team that I worked with last week,
Mhm.
is really informed by slowing down to speed up, prioritizing dialogue, inquiry and dialogue, and like contact. Did you hear what that person just said? Right? Could you restate what that person just said so that they can hear it, that you heard them, you know? And that is a constant tension between the pursuit of task completion versus, figuring out how to have effective process so that the task can get completed.
Mm. Mm.
So I would famously, as many of the rest of us do, say you have to slow down to speed up, right? But that takes a lot of conviction and like a worldview that the group actually has the capacity to solve a lot of its own problems. The group, the entity, the country,
Mhm. Mhm.
if you have the right viewpoints and they kind of can listen and hear and work together, versus maybe we have to, diagnose the problem and then kind of find the appropriate resources and then bring in a resource from outside the system, whether that's a framework or an idea or bunches of
Right.
money or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that strikes me as a really important principle of Gestalt change consulting is the intent is to leave the system stronger and more capable than it was before,
Yes.
right? So, it's you can come in with your process expertise and be useful
Mhm.
in the moment, help them get towards a solution, a decision.
Mhm.
But if there's nothing that helps them identify and become aware of their own capacity to do that kind of work,
Mhm.
or to learn from, the way that you're modeling this,
Yeah.
then they're just going to be always the system's never going to develop, is it?
Or it develops a dependency.
That's
I
true.
mean, I would say that that stance of we're helping the system learn. Lots of people would say those words, and probably every consultant well, lots of consultants would say that and I mean consultancies, right? But the big consultancies have a different motive, right? And sometimes, I mean, they have competing commitments, right? Commitment, on the one hand, to help the system, learn and grow and develop, and then maybe move over to some other challenge, but also to, have to pay their own bills and, stay relevant in the system. So
Mhm.
I think my Gestalt worldview that I so firmly believe ends up with I need and want the system to outgrow me. And I experience the system as like very like that's disarming to them
Mm.
in its own way. Like it helps reduce resistance to the stereotype of the change consultant or the consultant that's coming in. And I don't know if you have that same experience where you have to sort of say, well, I am a consultant, but I'm not one of those consultants.
That's
I'm
familiar,
like trying to
certainly.
have to
Right.
to
Right.
explain.
Yeah. to kind of sort of reset assumptions about what it means as the client to work with consulting support.
Yeah, it changes everything, actually.
Hmm. Hmm.
That fundamental assumption about ultimately you're going to be running these things. You're going, you are definitely going to learn how to manage and see phenomena in your own team and figure out how to practice, what to say and when to say it and things like that. That's in that on the cusp between, like, in a training program, like we've designed lots of training programs and they're infused with Gestalt too. But people come knowing it's a training program or a development program. And then on the other hand is to take the same philosophy and kind of use it live as a support structure to an organization that's going through a lot of change, which ends up with, at least for me, lots of conversations about, like, how do we organize the support?
Hmm.
Like, how many meetings and where's the setting? Like, how's the room set up? Is it
Right.
set up in such a way that there can be a lot of movement and dialogue and interaction, or is it a big U with a big PowerPoint, huge screen behind me and
Hmm. Hmm.
you know
Yeah, it's interesting. A little before we began recording, we were talking a little bit about ways of cultivating safety for people, for participants.
yeah.
Um, and so this piece you're talking about, I'm not sure I've really heard in my own training and development as a Gestalt practitioner. I don't think I've heard people talking about the importance of the room and the chairs and things like that, right?
Mhm.
But it strikes me, it's a really significant piece of attending to the sort of the physical environment, the physical system, to create the right container that's then able to support and enable a sense of psychological safety, a
Mhm.
place in which trust can develop, in
Mhm.
which dialogue can take place.
Mhm.
And that when, I've had these experiences, I'm sure you have, you come in and the room is set up like a boardroom and people are sitting opposite each other around a long table. It takes away from the things we're trying to nurture and develop as capacity in that team.
Absolutely. And the boardrooms are the worst because, in the ground of that room, I mean, there are ghosts in the room and there are ghosts inside people's own experience of being in the room.
Hmm.
So, figure ground, another thing that's super important for me is that I learned from Gestalt process is to be super curious about what's in the ground of the people, of the team, of the system, of the room. What are the constellations, that we bring into our present moment. So yeah, I mean that I spend a lot of time asking a lot of questions and making requests
Hmm.
about the space that we're going to be in, the food, the amount of time, that how will people be, how are their needs being met, right?
Hmm.
From
Hmm.
all the needs
Hmm.
and from various people. And certainly as it relates to safety, talking about power and the leader's impact and watching people interact with the leader and the leader interact with the people, is a major safety variable
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
that we all bring our own stories to.
Right, right. So, Fran, I'm curious about something. In your practice, you work with individuals through forms of executive coaching.
Yep.
You work with teams, and I think through teams, you work with bigger organizational systems. Are there any differences in how you show up to support an individual client system versus a team or a group or bigger organizational entity? Any differences that you could think about in how you prepare yourself, how you show up?
First thing that pops to my mind is that teams are super complex.
Mm.
And part of it comes from my own training that has a lot more frameworks about teams and groups. So I do show up differently how would I answer the question? I would say like, after my own personal growth journey, as I'm still on it, I can now interact and be a effective executive coach where I'm really present with somebody and be kind of helpful and reflective and, creative. And that's so much simpler in a way. I mean, what's hard about it is you can't see what's over their shoulder. I mean, I'm always trying to figure out like what's going on with their teams, like effectively like looking around them and getting them to, but we're limited by what they share, by their worldview and things like that. So it's when I'm with the team, it's really freeing to be able to see the dynamics myself and feel the dynamics also. So how does that change I'm physically like move around a lot more as I just have more freedom in both intervention, but also space.
Right.
You know? And there's so many more places of intersection, so many more choices.
Yeah.
Which makes it more fun for me most of the time. It requires a lot of energy to track all the people.
Right. And in that tracking, the energy around it, but then also trying to assess which figure to attend to, because there's going to be many more figures emerging.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's about choice then, right? And they're trying to, and like with more and more experience, I've gotten more self-compassion to be like, it's a matter of choice. I mean, like it might be the best choice. It might be just the choice that caught my attention, right? And we will do something with whatever we do. And that leads to experiments, right? And so there's something to be learned from any of the angles that we go. Doesn't make them all subjectively equal. I'm not saying that. Because I think, informed by whatever the task is and the team is and, many things, I can imagine that I've got to support the group to start to see things that are more or less important. And that does take some choice, some more active facilitation. So I have to give myself permission to think like, I'm not going to be wildly off. I'm not going to do any harm. That's like, totally one of my Hippocratic oaths here.
Right.
Which is not always easy because you don't always know all that's going on. And so, different times that's been the challenging thing is to not make anything worse and try to make things better.
Yeah. So it's about 30 years since you had your first development training as a Gestalt practitioner.
Yeah.
The world hasn't stood still, right? You've had other opportunities of learning, deepening your practice.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that are sort of have been showing up recently that you've kind of noticed like, I need to sharpen, my ability in that area that hasn't been as figural as a part of my practice? What's been sort of showing up in your own continuing development as a Gestalt practitioner?
Good question. Well, in this present moment, in this extended present moment, it's about really working with multiple realities. And I mean, that's kind of been the last few years, but I'd say it's really, as people are more surfacing their own realities, I think it's so that leads to conflict and kind of keeping people together and connected and respectful of one another, and keeping people on the on the field, as it were. So that maybe has made me more of an active facilitator more recently, just as I kind of think about it off the top of my head, out of my own sense of activation to not assume everybody is thinking the same way, which we know that they aren't, but we would have always known that, but I don't know that it would have been so like immediate. B, keep the dialogues flowing, And again, some people would have just not said anything. And I think historically we would have been respectful, we Gestaltists, of people's rights to say nothing. But at a group level, if there's people who are like not saying anything, then now that's making other people anxious. Not that it didn't in the past, this is hard to generalize. So bringing groups and systems together around common purpose and, really continuing to not take for granted that the idea that if we work together, we're going to get a better result. Like everybody's sort of working together, we can get a better result without burning people out. I think the burnout is another factor that is very cyclical, and I'm seeing people burning out again now, right? It's not that people aren't always working hard, but the added stress, whenever there are added stressors, whether through technology or globalization or politics or polarization, it's another layer. You see, new technology, how to work with new technology, what's that going to mean for us? Like really hard questions that leaders and teams have to answer now that they really don't know the answer to, because it's an unknown future, is new, new, or old and new again, but it's back, let's say, in 30 years. I've seen a few cycles of this.
Right.
And of course, that leads to simplistic answers and like top down, dictates. We will do it this way out of frustration for some people.
Right. Yeah. So moving our conversation towards a close.
Yeah.
You've got this fantastic wealth of experience that you've gained in multiple situations, multiple contexts, working with hundreds of leaders and teams around the world. What's becoming figural for you that maybe sits at the essence of your Gestalt practice?
Beautiful question, Michael. It is essence. The emergence and optimism, like people wanting to grow, the way, just like a shoot, almost spring, right? Like and how tender that space is, whether it's at the individual or group level, like that emergence of the want to be better, do a better thing, be a better partner, be a better, team member, be a better leader. That really lies behind so much. I think that's one thing for sure. Also, the power of aesthetics. I really wanted to bring that figure to this conversation. That the times when I really slow down enough to be, having that framework of the artistry of what we do, the better off everything is. Sort of to free ourselves as interveners over time, right? Because it's very hard to do with lots of groups and people looking at you in contracts and all that jazz. To appreciate that it's a relational form, whether we're coaching, and again, this goes back to your earlier question about coaching team, blah, blah. To keep people moving and active and in some kind of dance with each other and with their selves, their emergence, and the emergence at the organizational level. I think that's really profound, and I just love the beauty of it. I can see now way more than I could. I intellectually understood it way back when, but now I'm like, that is a thing of beauty, that conversation that group just had, or those two people just did with themselves, and to see the kind of interaction pattern and the poignancy, I guess. It's like bringing that emotional beauty, like art,
right,
is present for us if we can see it.
Right.
And work with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful. again, so what comes up for me is just this the importance of our own presence, right? And when we seek to show up in ways that can help people slow down to move fast,
Yeah.
we ourselves then can't be running into that space with minimal preparation and running from this thing to the next thing. We need to ourselves prepare ourselves to show up and be impactful through our presence in all of these different places we find ourselves.
Yeah. So that's an emergence for me, is
Mhm.
better self-care.
Mhm.
I will just own that right now. So thank you for bringing that to I mean, I know I'm like I'm in a constant dialogue with myself about, what do I need to do to take care of myself to be able to be the best for whomever I'm supporting.
Mhm.
I think presence is the other answer to your earlier question about like what is the thing, the essence. Is like people take us in and they're making limbic decisions or calculations about whether or not they're safe
Mhm.
and with us and in this space.
Mhm.
And it's that the like all the meeting designs that I've ever done and thrown away. At the end of the day, it comes down to like, do they feel safe with me, with us, to do something that's emerging and tender and hard. And out of the hard, the struggle, the friction comes the growth.
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be huge, doesn't need to be like, you so the elegance of like undesigning
Mhm. Mhm.
is, something that over time, now that doesn't mean I don't over design and then throw it out, because somehow there's some relationship that I haven't figured out.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that might actually be part of my self-care for me personally. It's like, okay, if I think I know what we're all doing, and then I can like let it aside and work
Yeah.
with what emerges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I think the presence, the seeing, the noticing, to throw it away and have like throw it aside and be present with the people and whatever the work is that's right there is what's surprising to the participants, call them
Mhm.
participants,
Mhm.
but
Mhm. Mhm.
and actually paradoxically makes them feel safe,
Right.
if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
because like we're back to presence with them, and that starts like with our own ability to let go of, make those choices.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that strikes me as being I'll use this word again, the essence of practice is not about knowing tools and techniques and principles and how to work with groups and how to coach and things like that, but knowing that as we sort of tend to ourselves, our own presence, our use of self, we're then able to embody all of these other Gestalt practices. And that's what makes the difference for our client systems.
Yeah, I guess, and I would say I would lift up in your sense of self, right? It's to just be explicit about in yourself or in your ground are lots of things which enrich it,
Mm-hmm.
that make you be able to make choices
Mm-hmm.
and like make some maneuvers or whatever. It's not just my heartfelt sense of presence with
Mm-hmm.
you. It's
Mm-hmm.
also, and again, at the group, team, and system level, it's the ability to make complicated, I don't even know, cognitions,
Mm-hmm.
but based on what's in our ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes there's some people that just think I'm just going to be like a Zen master facilitator and I'm going to sit and wait for what emerges. And that causes anxiety on the part of the people who are like, but wait, we have got to get things done. Da, 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 da. So like meeting people where they're at, being experienced as trustworthy,
Mm-hmm.
good listener,
Mm-hmm.
present, active and passive, right? Whatever is needed, and it enables the maneuver. And then by the end, I'm like, I am now Zen, Zen Gestaltist.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? So I don't want to appreciate all of the stuff that's in our grounds that makes it possible for us to do that thing. I'm speaking really to the teacher in me that's supporting other people,
Mm-hmm.
or the me 30 years ago that would be like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be that, but I have no idea what to do. And I'm too young to just sit there in the circle and say very little. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't get called out enough, I don't think.
Right.
But how you use it is the question, back to process, right? How we use all the choices that we can do, our expertise or our relationship to our own ego. You know?
Right. Right. Fran, do you have a closing thought or comment?
No, I'm going to be Zen.
I mean, I think you kind of were saying it, just right before I asked my question about, how we make the choices to access and use all of what's available to us.
Yes, which includes a sense of humor and egolessness, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I guess I would say that. I mean, that's that between the aesthetics and the sense of humor and the rhythm and kind of feeling connected to people,
Mm-hmm.
and however we get there is every individual person's journey, is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's highly motivating, continues to be motivating for me to help individual group members or leaders feel more in their own self. They're and like accessing that compassionate, I'm going to throw the agenda out, themselves, like not just us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they have to see it rather than be told it.
Right. Right.
Like the way you've done this interview.
Well, we try and show up in ways that are supportive for the reflection and so on.
And it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Fran, thank you for taking this additional time and sort of reflecting on and sharing your practice,
Mhm,
how you are as a practitioner, and
mhm.
how you bring that to the systems with which you're interacting and influencing.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Well,
sharing this.
and thank you for giving me a little more time to talk about the application, which I care so, so much about, how we actually use it.
Right. Right. Thank you.